Hello, I'm Jan Rishadams, the Vice President of U.S. Development with Join Mayshad. We are an ecosystem of brands for women, by women, connecting women to each other and to the companies, causes, and organizations that champion equity for women professionally and personally. You're here with us today watching our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion show brought to you each and every week. Please make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can stay caught up on all of our upcoming episodes, and check us out at joinmeshad.com where you can learn more about how you too can become a part of how we together revolutionize how professional women connect, engage, and do business together. Thank you for tuning in with us today. We have a very special show for you planned. I would like to welcome Hanadi Chehabeddine to the stage, to our virtual stage.
Thank you for having me, Jen. Thank you.
Of course, Hanadi is an award-winning public speaker and inclusion consultant. You and I were having a really interesting conversation before we started taping around a sense of community, and what does being a part of a community mean during this period of time. And I would love for you to share what you shared with me during the course of our pre-show conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I've been reflecting recently on COVID-19 and the effects of that virus on our communities. And one of the things that I was contemplating on is how we're being forced to collaborate. So, for example, while a person wearing a mask is mostly protecting others, there is a sense of community and obligation for people to wear masks to protect each other. So this collaboration never existed before. We're being forced to think collaboratively as one community. And if we're not going to do that on a lot of fronts, we're going to be failing. Another aspect is data transfer or data sharing between countries, because every country is going through this virus in a different way. And if we're able to collaborate and aggregate this data, we're able to move faster than having to fail at each individual country level. So one of the things that I've been contemplating on due to COVID-19.
I want to go back to 4 years ago when you gave a TED Talk, TEDx talk, and you were contemplating about whether or not to go back to Lebanon on the eve of our election 4 years ago. So here we are 4 years later, and at that time your daughter had said to you, but if we leave, then we're running away.
And running problems, yeah.
Exactly, and I'm curious to know 4 years later now, given where we are as a country, and how we think about everything from democracy and equality and inclusion and equity, what thoughts are running through your mind this time around?
Well, the one word that really is popping up is resilience. You know, the fact that we are a lot more resilient than we think. On the bright side, if we were to look at the bright side, within the last 4 years, there's been more, mobilization of organization towards more justice and equity in this country. We have seen more organization within communities of color. We have seen more awareness building towards issues of importance. Now, unfortunately, this has happened at the expense of unfortunate events. It has happened at the expense of lack of leadership due to COVID-19 and the excess of loss of life that we are witnessing. But as a country, I would say within the past 4 years, we're building that sense of, communal resilience, I would say. So she was right. My 6-year-old back then was right.
Very smart young woman. It's interesting because we do talk a lot about resilience now, in addition to, things like, empathy and understanding and, tolerance and thinking about, intersectionality differently. And so, I think, in large part in the past, we've thought about gender as a binary construct, race and ethnicity as binary constructs. And yet we know that identity is very complex because in many ways we're all very privileged in our unique ways, and in other ways we're also very oppressed. Talk to us a bit about what that means to you and the passion then behind the launch of your business and what you're achieving through talking specifically through things like this.
Well, I would say that with this system of oppression that exists systematically here in the US, a lot of minorities are feeling more empowered to really surface those issues and to bring about the issues that they care about the most. If you see the representation of people of color in the government recently has exceeded any other time in history. So I think the flip side is that, you know, we're mobilizing, we're being more outspoken, and we're speaking up and we're speaking out on issues that matter to us. And the community is responding. That's, you know, the community is listening, they're tuning in, and that is very empowering.
You know, I love what you just said, because yes, it is about speaking up, and it's about, we saw, you know, during Black Lives Matter here in the US, you know, people taking to the streets and protesting and, you know, demanding that change happen in very peaceful ways. But then also it's, you know, what do you do after that's done, right? What do you do after you use your voice to ensure that action actually happens, right? That we're actually truly making progress. Talk to us about how your work also inspires the action part of social justice and inclusion and change in that front.
So at the base of my thought is the power of the voice. How we as minority will never be able to surface the issues that are of extreme importance to us if they're not being recognized by the majority. And that's how democracy works. The voice of the majority is always screaming louder and proceeding with issues more than you know, the voice of minority. There are one of two scenarios in which we can actually make a difference. When the voice of minority is not an option anymore, it's a requirement. When we don't sideline things because issues are not important to us, the pain of minorities will never be felt by the majority because they don't have that experience piece. Unless there is compassion, and the only way this can surface is by people listening to minorities. People, you know, and minorities sharing their stories. And that's behind my brand, Hanadi, the Specific Benefit Corporation, a voice for a minority that has been underrepresented, sidelined, marginalized, disenfranchised for, you know, years. And the need to be heard, the need to say, I have a story, I matter. My perspective matters. And in fact, without my perspective, there's lack of innovation, there's lack of productivity, and all these beautiful things that are the result of a solid and rigid diversity and inclusion initiative.
You've been called a world-class peacekeeper and an everyday hero. I love both of those phrases. I think it means so much on so many different levels, just in the sense of how you envision there to be a better world and a better community locally and globally. But when you hear both of those, world-class peacekeeper and everyday hero, what does that mean to you?
It means one thing: validation. It means that my efforts have been noticed. It means that my voice has been heard. It is actually, you know, it's really humbling and flattering to be called both of these titles. But for me, it meant there's more work to be done. There is a lot more to it. And based on that, I established my company and I started reaching out to organizations, not just to hear about what Muslims have to say, but also generally the empowerment of minorities, the, you know, corporate social responsibilities, and all these the topics that were at one point not very essential to the conversation in the workplace.
You know, it's interesting to talk about the workplace, because that's here in the United States. We don't often talk about religion, and we talk about gender and race and class, and things that HR can, you know, track, for example, and monitor, in the sense of, you know, making advancements in those spaces. We often don't talk about religion in the workplace. What does your work do to change that dialogue, to make it acceptable, to be able to start to open up the dialogue in the sense of having religious tolerance, both professionally and personally as well?
Well, the most important part is to understand that if it plays out, it has to be talked about. Religion plays out in our politics. I mean, we claim to be a country that has separated church and state, but if it is true, we would have never had a Muslim ban, for example. how could a Muslim ban surface when there is a separation of state and religion? So I think the more companies realize that it's important to talk about these things, the better equipped they are to be inclusive. Let's take a very practical recent example with Mulan, where the movie was shot in the exact same space where the Uyghur Muslims are being held. About more than 1 million people were held and prosecuted concentration camps. The company is now facing, a lot of backlash on thanking the Chinese government, and they've missed out on 25% of the world population. They've actually dismissed basic human rights that represents 25% of the world population. How could an organization, what does it say about the organization itself? What does it say about the people that work there? Again, if the pain of minorities is not felt, the majority will miss out on it, and eventually they will fall into these, disastrous reputation damage that they will have to kind of work through from here on.
And do you think that with everything that's happened globally with COVID, that there is a different sense of awareness or a heightened sense of responsibility that leaders and managers and owners now feel, moving beyond just having DEI initiatives where things get checked off a box, right? So you have it, you implement it, you hire a chief diversity officer, you check it off the box and you move on because everything's fixed, right? But do you think that because of many of these things that are kind of culminating and bubbling to the surface right now that can no longer be ignored because they are so visual, that companies will take on a different level of responsibility, not because they feel like they're being watched, but because actually they know in their heart of hearts it's the right thing to do? And I know that that's a complicated question because companies obviously exist to make profit, but how do we move beyond that, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, actually, people are demanding corporations to be more responsible. Studies show that 80% of consumers are requesting and demanding and expecting corporations to fill the gap that exists between education, for example, and the business market. Take the example of IBM and how they have started an initiative to get into schools. I believe it's about 300 schools around the world to train people on technological advances and offering them an opportunity to work at IBM. And so they have filled the gap that exists between education and businesses so that people, are not constrained to their zip codes. They overcome this problem. So corporate social responsibility is the new thing. It is the new diversity and inclusion, really filling in the gap that exists in the community, because at the end of the day, wherever this organization exists, it's exhausting the resources, the local resources, and it's using up the human resources that exist. So there is a sense of responsibility to give back, and Czech is not doing it anymore. That's the really old school of thinking about things, but talking about leveraging, nurturing, culturing, talents and providing a space for growth beyond the government.
It's interesting what you said, that the writing a check no longer does it, because that was so much when we think about, the way in which, people here in the United States help others, from, philanthropic endeavors and charities to funding, startup companies to, whatever the case is. It's often about the exchange of money, right, as a transaction. But what you're talking about goes above and beyond kind of that impersonal sort of transactional flow, and really does get at the heart of the matter and the root cause of actually what has caused institutionalized forms and systems and policies and laws that support the privileging of one body of people over another. Absolutely, and consumers are demanding that. So companies are tuning in. Most companies are leaning in. They want to know more. They want to be proactive in that sense. And in the issues of Black Lives Matter are surfacing more,
just highlighting some of the organizations that are doing the work and some that are just staying silent. And this specific time is really unacceptable.
It's everyone from a social media perspective, uses the meme silence is complicity, right?
Exactly.
And I think that there's, in many cases, people who do want to do good in the world, but don't know what they don't know, in the sense of understanding when is the right time to speak up, when is the right time to say something, when is the right time to push back. And those forms of hesitancy often come from exactly those people who should be speaking up and using their voices, right? Because they do have some sort of unearned privilege afforded to them. What would be your message for those people who do want to do good, but feel a bit paralyzed or frozen by how do you really use your voice to make change happen in your own communities, or even globally for that matter?
Yeah, and it's a complex question. I wish there's just one answer to that, but I believe that with people realizing that their own privileges are the cause of other people's, misery, there is a sense of guilt, and it's, it exists in every community. Within my own Muslim community, there is prejudice against people of color, from people from specific ethnicities, and it's hard to work through these emotions because they're intense emotions. There is a sense of guilt that keeps people hiding. Maybe they don't know what to say. I think it's really important to really express and be open about what a person is feeling. Even if saying, I don't know what to say, is a statement that could mean something to people who are expecting an answer. Even saying, I feel guilt and I want to move past that. I want to move towards action and aligning my values with what I can do in my own privileges. So opening the dialogue, really staying transparent in the process, and not pretending that this doesn't exist or does not concern me or I'm not part of the problem, because whichever way you look at it, you're either the victim or the oppressor. That there isn't somewhere in between.
It's interesting to hear what you're saying, and thank you for that advice, because I think it really gets to the heart of, I think, what many people are really struggling with right now, particularly in 2020 during election year, during the pandemic, during the escalation of the protests, and people demanding change, and understanding that change can happen in so many different ways, as consumers, as end users, as those of us who consume and purchase and invest and save, and et cetera, et cetera. Let's talk a bit about the role of social media in all of this too, because now, everything is transparent in the sense of anything can be seen and heard. But we also know that there's a lot of fake news out there too. And so, from your perspective, how has fake news and the way in which people use social media caused further divides in how we think about inclusion and a sense of belonging in community? And in what ways has it brought people closer together in the work that you do?
Yeah, fake news. It's not new to Muslims specifically to be part of that. And it wasn't long ago that Muslims have started reappearing in debates as part of, like, we're going to protect the American people against terrorists and, dormant cells among Muslims. So, and we see that followed up with a lot of fake news, specifically over social media. And I don't know what the answer to that is. I believe the more we are informed, the more we're taking actions, the more we are actually legislating some of these actions and putting checkpoints for the system to stop at. I believe it's very early on when it comes to the Muslim community, but I do hope that, as this keeps happening, we're more aware and conscious that this is affecting people's life. It's really affecting people's health, and it's just the right thing to do. Social justice work is not charity. I do not want somebody that allies with me because poor Hanadi, she has been missing out on whatever. I really invite people to start thinking of social justice as something that contributes to their well-being, because it's the right thing to do. You do that for your own good, even though I am the primary benefiting person, but there is benefit to everyone when we live in a just society.
I love the way you just flipped that, right? Because I think it makes the work so much more powerful and the results so much more powerful. And honestly, it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of our conversation around, just even something as simple as whether or not to wear a mask during COVID, which has become very politicized in the United States. But it's really about flipping the sense of responsibility that you have, not just to yourself, but to others around you as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Let's talk about something that everyone seems to be talking about right now, unconscious bias as a phrase. And one of my fears with once words become jargon, and once it hits mainstream, then, are we moving toward another world where things start to get checked off a box again, which is definitely not what we want to have happen. We want to actually have there be meaningful strategy and implementation and measurement. But yet it's also something really important that many of us have been talking about for many years, just in the sense of understanding how you show up, right? And understanding that, the world that you see through your eyes is the sum of all of the parts of your own socialization process, right? In the sense Absolutely. Of like, what family you were born into and how you're socialized and how you're raised. But, share with us the work that you do in helping others not just think of unconscious bias as, kind of the catchy phrase of 2020, but actually something really very meaningful in the sense of really doing that deep self-assessment to understand, how you're showing up to the world and what does that mean then in the sense of how others perceive and experience you.
Yeah. So when I started my company, I wanted to share my story with the world. And this is why I called my company Hanadi by my first name. And then, the clients that heard my story the first year came back the next year saying, we want something deeper. How can we get to know you more or the work that you do? And then the companies that did that the first year came back the second year saying, what kind of coaching can we do for leaders to be more inclusive? The point I'm trying to make is it's important to start the conversation. It's important to tackle some of these difficult conversations. A lot of companies are afraid to talk about religions, afraid to talk about Muslims, or afraid to talk about any minority that is conflicting or that they do not know much about. But I think starting these conversations is the first step towards your unconscious bias, actually being able to say yes to something you believe is not really important because you just don't see it through that person's eye. Whether we like it or not, 1% of the Americans are Muslims, and it's either represented in companies or it's not represented in companies. So we need to examine the pipelines. Are we missing out on talents that needs to be in our workforce? Are we missing out on perspectives and innovation when we're not totally equitable? So unconscious bias may be a trending term, but I do believe that we have to start somewhere. We have to start calling things, by the name, and we need to start having those conversations.
It's fascinating because we were talking earlier around the intersectionality of identity, right? And an understanding that, now in 2020, people identify in so many different ways, right? And so I'm wondering, is there a fear on your side that the complexity of the multitude of intersectionalities as it pertains to identity is going to in some way water down and dilute your overall goals and objectives as it pertains to equity in the workplace, if that makes sense?
I don't know. It is diluting it in the sense that people, personally, I'm discovering more that I'm not just a Muslim. I am a mother. I am a U.S. citizen. I am an immigrant. I'm a woman. So all of these intersectionality come together on an intersection, that makes me who I am and makes me unique, makes my experience unique. And the more we're sharing about those intersectionality, the more we can relate to one another. I'm only perceived as a Muslim, but that's not all of who I am. And in sharing that diversity of perspective, people are able to relate. People are able to develop that empathy that is extremely important in cultural competence.
So there's almost like a, oh, I experienced that too, right? There's a relatability around the sharing of that experience. Let's talk about gender for a second. We know that, Mayshad is a network of female corporate executives and business owners and entrepreneurs. And many of us are also in transition during this time. But staying very supportive of each other is one of the core things that we believe in the sense of how we think about an ecosystem and a community. But we know that women often historically, and even currently for that matter, have not always played nice together in the sandbox, right? In the sense of, historically, there were very few senior level positions for women. And so there's a sense of competitiveness because there were so few seats at the top. That's played out. And, we've been socialized in very different ways too. I'm wondering, from the work that you do and from your perspective, have you also experienced the we all desire the notion of playing well together in the sandbox, but often that doesn't happen. And then in those cases, then what can we do as women to support each other in different ways that feels much more inclusive?
Wow, that's an amazing question. And, I'll be very honest with this one. So my struggle with specifically women organization is that the way I am perceived, or the stereotypes that are inflicted on me as a Muslim woman, contradict what women organizations are working for. So if the stereotype that is attached to somebody who looks like me is I am, against gender equity, or women are oppressed in Islam, or there is a sense of like this imbalance. For me as a Muslim woman, I need a sense of assurance that I'm understood before I'm able to contribute to such organizations. So the more we're having conversations about those differences, like what is a gender equity in Islam, I feel more comfortable to really start sharing and collaborating with organizations that see eye to eye with my understanding of equity and acknowledge that there are different ways of seeing things and that my perspective matters. And it's there will be more the field is leveled for me to participate. But definitely I believe that reaching out to a Muslim women organization is extremely important. RISE, which is the reviving of Islamic sisterhood empowerment, that is based here in the Twin Cities with Nashina Hussein, who's doing amazing work to mobilize the voices and to be a powerful example and of an organization that is empowering Muslim women and collaborating on different fronts. But that voice is extremely important. I don't know if I've answered your questions, but this has been something that I've always wanted to share.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for what you just said. And at the same time, I'm wondering, so what is the resistance? Like, where do you feel today in 2020? Historically, it's so many different reasons, right? For the ways in which our institutions and just even honestly, from how this country was founded on individual rights versus community rights, right? And so this country was founded in a very different way, and the legacy of that, everything from slavery to how we think about property to how we think about access to capital. Women weren't even allowed to have credit cards in their own name until, just a couple of decades ago, right? And so historically, that's all very easily understood, but yet we're in 2020, right? And so now being very, very honest and very open in the sense of why haven't we made more progress? What are your thoughts on that?
Why haven't we been having a progress? I do not know. Part of it is not being interested in learning more about how others view the world. And part of it is misinformation and not having the time really to inquire whether what I know about a specific minority is actually true, reaching out to a community or learning more about my neighbor who just looks different, or, it's just a lack of interest, lack of time, lack of commitment to a sense of community.
I wonder also, going back to what you were just saying around, this whole new notion of corporate social responsibility 2.0, right? The next wave of how companies become better corporate citizens and become more responsible to all of us. And I'm wondering if that's an avenue for education as well, in the sense of companies also understanding that they're in a prime position, prime spot to be one of the best educators, in the sense of if they're truly building diverse teams and hiring more equitably to ensure that there's equal representation for what the American population actually looks like from a demographic perspective, then companies are then taking on a whole different heightened level of responsibility for having some of those conversations that we're talking about now.
Absolutely. I do believe that this is the, it's some companies are actually talking about this, but it's again, a trending issue that companies want to address, really matching the resources that they have with the community needs and filling the gaps in a way that makes them not just existing in a business sense, but also collaborating within the the environment that they are built in.
You talk a lot about the phrase "hear from us" as it pertains to ensuring that Muslim women have a safe space to be able to talk about many of the things that you and I have been talking about today. How has that evolved in the work that you do, and what are your passions and your ultimate goals for, being a part of the solution and bringing more of those safe spaces to fruition?
Yeah, I remember when I was writing this, Hear from Us was an outcry, a desperate outcry for intentionality, asking the public to intentionally seek perspective, asking the public to really care enough to reach out to somebody that they do not know. Hear from Us is really a state of a lot of minorities. Hear from Us is the actual status of the African American communities right now. And the more we listen, the more we're able to understand the pain, the more we're mobilized to make the change that is required to, for people to thrive, for everyone to thrive. So Hear from Us is a call to intentionality.
I love that word, intentionality. Let's broaden this up to the global perspective right now. It's, COVID is still with us, and it's not going away anytime soon for so many different reasons. And I'm wondering, in the work that you do globally with companies, I would assume that, we're kind of all over the place in the sense of, everything from infection rates to flattening the curve to, peaking again, to whether or not kids are in school or not. And so it's really impacting us on a day-to-day basis in ways we never imagined. But then when you look at it globally, I would imagine that it's really very challenging for companies to just base set themselves in the sense of ensuring that their employees have everything that they need to be able to be, productive in the workplace and feel safe and fulfilled. Your family's in Lebanon right now. Will you share with us what's happening there, and what do you think that we here in the United States could learn from the resiliency of people in Lebanon right now?
Yeah, so just for those who are not really aware of what's going on, there's been a blast at the port, and that has left the city of Beirut shattered, literally, with people under the rubble and a lot of, I believe, 300,000 families that have become homeless because of the destruction that this has led to in a period where there was political unrest because of the corruption of the people in the government. it's really agonizing. And Jan, this is so important for all companies to really consider that when they have a community of immigrants, that this feeling of being torn between two things. So while I'm able to still continue my life normally here, I feel totally disabled in the sense I'm not able to be productive. I might have used the wrong word here, but basically saying I'm not able to focus, I'm not able to be productive, I'm not able to be present to my life over here, even though nothing happened over here. And that is the conflict of somebody who's an immigrant and has their heart in one place and they're still living in another. So what can, Americans or America do in such circumstances? I believe stop dealing with governments that are corrupt. If we are a democracy that is for human rights, for transparency in government, stop collaborating with governments that are failing to measure up to those standards. And that's what I believe is the right next step.
I'm going to complicate this a little bit even more. How do we understand standards? Like, how do we define exactly what are standards of protocol in the sense of how we think about, our core ethics as human beings and what we value and what we cherish? And I can't help but think about, the election that's happening in this country in 2020, that, what does that mean for, how we think about democracy and how we think about, the luxuries and the freedoms that many of us have access to here, but understanding that we're all also global citizens at the same time and have a level of responsibility to ensure that, we're protecting each other. And I think that much of what many of us experience now, no matter what side of the political fence that you sit on, but that's being eroded away at, right? How do you think about that right now?
Well, you sure complicated things, but but I'm happy you did that anyway. So if you look at diversity and inclusion is really not about changing people's minds. It's actually the opposite. It's about getting people to agree on a path that is respectful to all, despite disagreement. And I can definitely reflect on what you suggested right now. Like, how do we even define what ethics is? I believe that understanding how we all view different ethics in different ways is important to come up with a common definition that is respectful for all parties. So not really thinking that whatever we do here in the US is the ultimate thing that can be done anywhere in the world, but truly understanding the uniqueness of not just individuals, but of groups, of minorities, of countries, and how we all have something to contribute to in a global world. And it's not just the voice of the most powerful or the voice of the most economically solid country.
Thank you for that. I'm wondering, taking this from kind of this macro perspective that we've been talking about, in the sense of then, you as a businesswoman too, you travel and you speak publicly a lot.
Used to. Right? COVID.
Now we have COVID. So how have you thought about the way in which you pivot and transition to stay, top of mind in your space, given that you're not busy? Like, obviously you're on our stage today. We're so thrilled and honored to have you with us, but many stages aren't available now in 2020, and even who knows what 2021 is going to bring in the sense of, keynotes and speaking engagements and conferences and et cetera, et cetera. Like, how in your own business have you thought about transitioning, and what does change mean for you from that perspective?
Well, when COVID took place and we were sent home, just to kind of quarantine and be in that space, there was a lot of reflection that had to take place, as in what is it now? And at the same time, people had to be more flexible towards, what's new and what's the new normal. So in a way, it is true that all my events were canceled, but as companies realize that I cannot breathe is not just a statement for social minorities. I cannot breathe is also the result of COVID. So I cannot breathe is the state of a lot of social inequities that are taking place, starting with COVID hitting more minorities than others in terms of how it's transmitted and the death tolls. So the adaptation is taking place. People are being more flexible. Companies are realizing that this is not a work that they should put aside because of COVID. On the contrary, they're realizing that a lot more families do not have the resources that other people have, and have to redefine equities, redefine inequities in the times of COVID. So the requests for more presentations and more training is starting to resurface. I believe for me as a speaker, it's a lot more convenient for me not to leave my family and not to leave my kids over a period of 2 or 3 days. Conversations like these happen, and it's more convenient, it's more exciting, and I cannot wait for organizations to take the right next steps and elaborate on their diverse and inclusion initiatives.
Thank you for that. It's amazing, I think, the extent to which the digital space has provided so many really incredible, enriching opportunities for people to meet and to engage. And I think that for us, anyway, we used to do a lot of live events in New York City. And what it's done for us is that I think it's really facilitated almost more meaningful conversations, because all the other fanciness and all the other bells and whistles of what you would expect, right, at a live event have been stripped away. Now I see your office, you see my office, so we're kind of like, and it's a whole different level of intimacy, I think.
Absolutely. We have been more in people's houses than we've ever been. Somebody that you've worked with for like 10 years and you've never seen their spouses in pajamas, and now you have.
It's so true. How many close friends do we have where you think, well, I never actually knew you had that collection, or I've never been in your home. How could I have known you for 10 years and never actually been in your home?
Absolutely. It's forcing us to think in different terms, in more authentic terms. And there is this, a lot of people are looking for better answers, looking for greater answers. A lot of the things that are considered accessories have been stripped away. So now we're really having to be with our thoughts and be with the essence of our existence more often.
You talk a lot about getting uncomfortable in order for there to be the real conversations that need to happen. But yet, I can't help but think about from a compliance perspective, right? Because the United States is also a country where, it's there are a lot of, from a risk management and compliance perspective, there are a lot of policies and rules and regulations in place around what you can and can't say, right? And one of the backlashes that we saw from the Me Too movement, for example, was that, employers, directors, managers, employees now are scared. And so they have chosen silence, or they've chosen exclusionary behaviors to protect themselves and to protect their positions and protect their companies. And that's hurt women in many ways, because women aren't getting invited to the important meetings, or not getting invited to account dinners or client dinners or to whatnot. And of course, all of that's changed out with COVID. But so we saw this backlash from the Me Too movement. And I'm wondering, how do we ensure that we're both being respectful within a company, particularly if you're in an HR role or you're in a compliance role, and ensuring that you're following the policies and rules or regulations of the company or of this Department of Labor or whatever it is, but yet also still having those uncomfortable conversations to really get at the heart of the matter of many of the things that you brought up today in our conversation. How does that happen when, you're living in a world that is so heavily regulated?
So I think the first step would be to have a conversation about having a conversation. So not just really skipping that part towards really having the conversation, but talk about like, why do I want to accomplish this? Where is the pain point in this conversation? How do I want to have it so that people are not just ready to listen, but also contributed to the environment that is being created for those conversations. So having a conversation about having the conversation.
I like that because it almost says, like, I would like to get to know you better. It says, it's kind of like when you think about, how you engage with a person that you want to become a friend with, or, if you're, romantically interested in someone, then how do you date that person, right? It's taking those baby steps and, to open up the dialogue and say, hey, I really am interested and I really do care and I really do want to learn more and, be of assistance or guidance or help or whatever that is.
Absolutely. A primer.
I want to get your thoughts on mentorship and advocacy within the workplace and the importance of mentoring up, but then also mentoring down as well, in the sense of, thinking about how do we move the needle forward from the spirit of inclusion.
I do believe that organizations need to tailor make solutions for their for their employees. There isn't a one solution that fits all. The more we are attentive to the problem, the more we are able to actually define the problem, the better we are to implement the right solution. So a lot of organizations are really hosting conversations about unconscious bias that are really not going anywhere. And that is because it's not a piece of the puzzle. It hasn't been looked at holistically. The more we are able to define in terms of numbers and how we can translate some of those numbers into policies and initiatives and keep people accountable. So when we actually define the problem as being, say, not being able to find a horizon for a specific person's career, then mentoring and coaching is the right solution because it's more tailor-made and it's opening up those pathways that employees are expecting, whether, having somebody that is supporting them or being their advocate in that corporate ladder.
Now it's time for our lightning round. This is my favorite part of our shows. First question, fast forward to the end of 2021. What does December 2021 look like for you?
People celebrating, everybody's outside, people are gathering, events are taking place every day and life is back to normal. I hope, please, God.
As you're saying all of those words together, I'm envisioning just like fireworks and dancing and singing and
people taking their masks and throwing it in the air. It's like we're done with that period.
What advice would you give to your 85-year-old self today?
85 years old. Don't worry about things. It'll work out. It's going to be fine. Worry less, enjoy more.
Hanadi, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been such a delight and pleasure and honor to have you here. I'm so happy you spent the last hour with us.
It's my absolute pleasure, Jan. I'm really happy to be, having this conversation and being with you on the show.
You're welcome. How do our viewers stay in contact with you? How can they learn more about your work and what you do?
So connecting with me on LinkedIn and seeing all the videos that I, invite people to join me in my life and my lifestyle and get the perspective of what that is, and visiting my website, hanadispeaksout.com, because that's what I do, what I will always do, and I will do, speaking out.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. I'm Jen Rashadams, the Vice President of U.S. Development with Mayshad. Please, again, make sure to check us out at our YouTube channel where you can stay engaged with each and every episode from our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion series, Women in Money, and Speak Your Mind with Dr. Risa Reiger. And please make sure to join us at joinmashad.com.